always believed silence meant safety. It's only recently that I've started to question what it might also mean. Absence. The message came buried between a reminder for a neuroimaging seminar and a shipping notice for a book I no longer remembered ordering. A screenshot forwarded without comment from my cousin Claire Thanksgiving, plein femme at the Ellisons. Formal attire. Turkeys handled. The sender was Lila, of course. The group chat was titled Family Dinner. I stared at the top bar, 10 recipients. My name wasn't among them. A minute later, my phone buzzed. A separate message, this one from my mother. "You're probably too busy, so I didn't want to pressure you." It's nothing formal. No punctuation, no greeting, no question mark. Just a flat line meant to explain something that didn't make sense. I didn't respond. I set the phone face down on the countertop and walked to the cabinet above the sink. The scarf was still there, folded in thirds behind the tin of chamomile. Ivory wool hand-stitched with uneven lines. My grandmother Rose had made it the winter she turned 80. She once told me warmth isn't in the material, it's in the memory. I wrapped it loosely around my neck, even though the apartment wasn't cold. There had been a time when I planned those dinners. I knew where the serving platters were stored, how many candles fit the center table, who brought which dessert. I used to create color-coded grocery lists in shared docs, and double-check the number of chairs 3 days in advance. Now, it didn't even warrant a mention. On Lila's public Instagram story, posted just hours later, the invitation to her upcoming vow renewal was visible on the counter, her hand with its perfect manicure holding a champagne flute in the foreground. The card read, "You are joyfully invited to celebrate Lila and Graham, December 16th, at the Arbor Room." Below, in cursive, was a line meant to sound handwritten, "With love to our family, Mom, Dad, and Gina." I read it twice before realizing the mistake. My name wasn't Gina. I zoomed in, but there it was. Clear and black on cream Gina, not Grace. That error, printed in soft letterpress, told me more than anything else had. It wasn't the first time I had been misnamed. Once, at a fundraiser, Lila introduced me as my sister, the neurologist? Or is it neuro? Something I had laughed politely. It didn't feel like a slight then. Now it echoed. I poured the water slowly over the tea bag. The kettle's soft click still rang in the quiet. From the drawer I took out a mug, the one with the faint chip along the rim, where the glaze had thinned into a translucent ghost of itself. It read, "Steady does it," a gift from a patient long discharged. I sat at the kitchen table and let the steam brush my face. No TV, no music, no need to fill the air with something louder than my own breathing. It was quiet, but not empty. My mother once told me after I'd missed a family lunch due to surgery schedules, "You've always had your own rhythm. Maybe that's why it's hard for people to include you." She meant it as understanding. I heard it as a boundary. My father, more distant in his affections, once called to remind me about a birthday dinner, then added, "If you can make it, great. If not, no one will hold it against you." The implication was that I was already absent, even when I showed up. There's a kind of erasure that happens without ceremony. Not a fight, not a decision, just the quiet drifting of someone's name further down the list until it slips off entirely. I didn't call anyone to ask what had happened. I didn't send a message to clarify. I knew the script. Must have been a tech glitch. "Oh, didn't someone tell you? We assumed you were working." It's easier, I suppose, for them if I stay assumed. Stay elsewhere. The scarf still held a faint scent of rose oil, something my grandmother had pressed into the weave with her palms. Her voice returned now and then, not in full sentences, but in fragments. Some things unravel slowly. Grace, let them. I lifted the mug. The tea had cooled slightly enough to taste the bitter edge of mint. It grounded me. The invitation, the misspelling, the abstinence from the chat, none of it shocked me, but together they made something clear. I wasn't invisible. I was omitted. There's a difference. One happens accidentally. The other is a decision whether named or not. I folded the scarf tighter around my neck and reached for the envelope on the side table, a thank you card I'd been meaning to write to Dr. Mehra. The pen hesitated in my hand. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. To those who make space where others forget to. I sealed it, no signature, just the message. I didn't return to the invitation. I didn't recheck the chat. I sat still, listening to the kettle re-click as it cooled. They hadn't said I was unwelcome. They simply arranged a table where there wasn't a chair for me, and I chose not to ask why. I used to believe that making things easier for others would somehow make me belong. When I came home during my second year of medical school, I washed the dishes after dinner without being asked. The sink would fill with lukewarm water and the scent of lemon soap. My sleeves rolled back just far enough to avoid soaking the cuffs. No one ever noticed. Lila would already be in the living room laughing at something on her phone. My mother would be rearranging serving trays into better angles for next time. My father, often already asleep in his chair. At one of those dinners, I stood to give my chair to a neighbor who stopped by unexpectedly. Lila didn't move. She sipped her wine and crossed her legs slowly, letting the silence pass through her. My mother glanced up, only to say, "It's nice that at least one of my daughters has manners." There was no wink, no smile. Just a statement meant to sound like a compliment. Later that night, I folded napkins alone while they played cards in the den. I matched corners, stacked them evenly, pressed out creases with the flat of my hand. When I finished, I turned off the kitchen light without looking back. When my article was published in the Journal of Neurological Inquiry, I printed out a copy and placed it on the counter during Sunday lunch. I left it there like a calling card, the title page facing up my name in small letters, just beneath the headline. Lila had been featured that week in a local magazine for her volunteer campaign. The cover showed her holding a clipboard, smiling next to a mayoral candidate. At dinner, everyone passed the magazine around, offering comments. "She's so photogenic. You've always known how to present yourself well, Lila." When my mother reached for the article I'd printed, she didn't flip the page. "You should really be careful, Grace. Long hours, all that pressure, it takes a toll." No mention of the title. No question about the research. Just a note of concern disguised as dismissal. "There was a time I lived in the guest room for 3 months helping care for my grandmother when her memory began to slip. I coordinated her medications, took her to appointments, kept track of her moods in a notebook. Lila came by once unannounced, stayed for 11 minutes, and left with a photo she posted online. So lucky to have this time with Nana. My mother showed it to a neighbor the next day. She's always been the nurturing one. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. When I was invited to speak at the university convocation, one of 3 alumni honored that year, I asked my mother if she'd like to come. She hesitated at the threshold of the conversation. "Those events are so long. I'm not really used to academic settings. I'll feel out of place." I told her it didn't matter. She said it did. Afterward, she asked how it went. I said fine. She changed the subject before I finished the sentence. Lila hosted a fundraiser that month for a women's networking group. There were photos on every platform, her in a navy dress, my father in a tie he hadn't worn in years. In one image, my mother stood beside them holding a glass of wine captioned, "Proud of our girl." I remember folding the program from my university speech into thirds, sliding it into the back of a drawer I no longer opened often. I had hoped for a long time that proximity would eventually lead to recognition, that if I showed up, helped smooth the corners of family life, someone would name what I brought. Instead, I became the space between roles, not the hostess, not the favorite, not the one photographed or invited or remembered. At a birthday dinner last year, I arrived early and brought wine, Lila's favorite, the one with the foil top. She said always made a celebration feel complete. I left it on the counter with a bow. She never opened it. By dessert, someone else had claimed they brought it, and I didn't correct them. That night, as the table emptied and chairs scraped quietly across hardwood, my father turned to me. "You've always been the dependable one. Not flashy, but solid, as if that were the highest compliment one could give a table." In a childhood photo on the hallway wall, Lila's face is tilted toward the light, grinning already performing. I'm beside her, a half step behind, hands tucked into the sleeves of a sweater that no longer exists. My eyes are open, watching something off frame. The frame was dusted last month, but the photo hadn't been moved in years. Even now, I carry a key to their house on my ring, though no one has asked if I still use it. I keep a scarf in the front closet, folded behind a coat I've outgrown. I never take it when I leave. There are people who believe invisibility is something that happens from the outside in. I think it can begin from the inside too when you lower your voice. Step aside, wait your turn until the turn is never offered again. I stayed quiet, even when it stung, especially when it did. Some memories don't fade because they were painful. They stay because no one else seems to remember they ever happened. When I was 15, the Christmas tree leaned slightly to the left. My father kept saying it added charm, but I remember the tilt only because I watched a wrapped box slide slowly across the floor and stop by my foot. It was marked in black pen, "To Grace." No tag, no ribbon. Just handwriting that looked rushed. Inside was a used biology textbook, 5th edition spine cracked someone else's highlights in orange and green. I traced the worn corners with my thumb. At the bottom of the box, there was a receipt, folded once like it had been an afterthought. No note, no card, no signature. Lila opened her gift at the same time. A silver bracelet, initials engraved on the inside, LM. A velvet box. A handwritten note tucked beneath the lid, folded into a triangle, like she used to do with school lunch notes. "You make us proud, every day. Love, Mom." The bracelet had a tiny clasp shaped like a heart. Lila held it up to the light and laughed, clear, practiced, full of expectation. Everyone turned to her. My mother touched her shoulder and said, "It's delicate, just like you." I placed the textbook on the end table and folded the wrapping paper, neatly smoothing each line. No one noticed. The photograph from that day hangs in the hallway of their house. Lila smiling, my parents flanking her, a strand of tinsel caught in her hair. I'm in the background, partly turned away, adjusting my sleeve. During my final year of high school, I won the state research prize for a project on neuroplasticity in aging populations. The announcement was mailed to the house in a manila envelope with gold lettering and a certificate inside. I taped it to the fridge. The same week, Lila hosted a holiday assembly at school. She wore a red blazer and stood behind a podium, reading from a script with exaggerated pauses and cheerful tones. A local newspaper featured her on the cover the following weekend, with the caption, "Future leader Lila Whitlow inspires at winter event." The certificate I earned curled at the corners from refrigerator moisture. One night, I found it folded and placed in the junk drawer beside expired coupons and old batteries. At Lila's engagement party, the table was covered in white linen and dotted with floating candles. I helped the caterers unload trays. I organized chairs when no one else was looking. I stood beside the cake and smiled when asked to. My mother lifted her glass halfway through dinner, eyes misted, voice controlled. To Lila she began, and the room hushed. And to those who support her, the people who stay steady in the background. Sometimes that's the hardest role to play. She turned slightly in my direction. The glass in my hand stayed still. I didn't lift it. Later that evening, one of my cousins leaned over and whispered, "She meant you right. That was kind of nice." I nodded. I'd already learned how to smile when something didn't quite fit. There's a necklace in my jewelry box with a clasp that never held properly. It was a graduation gift. The chain catches on sweaters. I've never worn it outside the house. No one ever followed up about the ceremony. When I came home with my diploma, they were repainting the kitchen. The smell of primer covered the space where questions might have fit. I once brought a paper home from college, a research proposal that had taken me 6 weeks to draft. I left it on the dining table, hopeful like always. The next morning it had a coffee ring on the corner and a grocery list written on the back. I didn't mention it. I folded it once and placed it in the bin beneath the sink. There are things I was given, and things I was allowed to keep. The difference I've learned is not in ownership, but in recognition. A friend once asked me if I felt overlooked. I didn't know how to answer. It's hard to explain that being unseen isn't the same as being unloved. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's the echo left by a sentence that never finishes. In my parents' living room, there's a shelf of framed photos. Lila in her prom dress, Lila at her wedding, Lila beside a campaign banner. There's one of me, too, a childhood snapshot. I'm 6 holding a paper lantern. My face is mostly obscured by the light. No one ever replaced it. I've never resented the gifts she received. Not the trips, not the parties, not even the compliments. It wasn't what she got that lingered. It was what was missing each time someone handed me something and looked past my name. There's a difference between being included and being remembered. At some point, I stopped expecting tags. I stopped looking for notes. I just waited for someone to get the name right. There's a moment just after realization when the body still pretends nothing's wrong. I sat perfectly still. The email didn't scream. It didn't even blink. It just rested between a weekly lab update and an HR training notice. Subject: finalized patent filing, Boston General Research Division. I opened it, as one opens receipts, already knowing they've paid. The 3 names under the ownership section weren't surprising Lankim Moreno. What struck me was the blank space where mine should have been. No footnote, no omission code, no pending. I read the attachment twice. On the 3rd pass, I noticed someone had converted my original title, Neuroelastic Mapping for Chronic Instability, into something slicker, more palatable. NMCI Pathway Lang-Kim Method. The phrase sounded efficient, marketable. It wasn't ours. But maybe it never was. There had been 3 of us in that conference room the night it clicked. A storm outside. Cold pizza on the sideboard. My handwriting still on the whiteboard when I left near midnight. A broken red marker rolling along the ledge. I forwarded the email to Dr. Lang. He called quickly. "You didn't want to be listed, remember?" That's what Lila told me. I didn't breathe. She said you didn't need the hassle, didn't want to be attached to the legal mess. You always hated the politics. My hand found the edge of the desk. The veneer was chipped, a line of plywood visible like bone through skin. Honestly, I thought it was generous. She told us to move ahead without you, that you'd prefer it." There was no accusation in his voice, only ease, like a man who'd given away someone else's coat and truly believed it wasn't needed. He hung up. I didn't say anything. I scrolled to Lila's name. Her last message glowed blue unread. "You've got enough going on. I was just trying to make things easier for you." No punctuation. Not even my name. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and pulled out the research folder marked Phase 3 Drafts, Whitlow. The label was faded, the tab slightly bent. Inside were annotated charts, margin notes in blue, and a sticky note with half a thought written upside down. Check variance around day 17, nonlinear. I laid the pages out in order, each one familiar like a worn sweater. I hadn't looked at them in months, trusting the process, the team, the chain of ethics we were trained to believe in. I never signed anything, because we'd agreed it was ours. All of ours. I ran my fingers over the stain in the lower corner of page 9. Coffee. Mine. I'd spilled it during the final run of simulations when Lang had gone home early and Kim was on leave. I had stayed behind and made it work. My mother called as I sat surrounded by drafts and memory. Her voice sharp, clipped. "Grace, honestly, why do you always think people are out to get you? Can't things be simple for once? No pause, no waiting, just judgment packaged neatly in concern." She continued without prompting. "You've always taken things too seriously. It's exhausting to keep walking on eggshells around your sensitivity." I let her voice hang, then lowered the phone gently onto the table. The screen dimmed on its own. In the quiet, I looked at the chipped teacup beside me. It had a line running down from the rim to the base, hair thin but present. It had belonged to my grandmother, the one who used to tell me that some cracks let in clarity. Not light clarity. I drank from it anyway. I used to think being thorough was enough, that if I did the work right, showed up, kept silent when others took the microphone, I'd still be part of the story. What I hadn't understood was how easily people rewrite the credits. Even easier if you don't interrupt them. The next day, I received a brief note from HR acknowledgement of contribution internal only. A gesture, not binding. No public recognition, just a polite footnote for an audience that would never read it. I printed it and slipped it into the back of the folder. Not as proof, not for leverage. Just to remember how quietly things vanish. There's a drawer in my apartment filled with old ID badges, hospital names, research centers' initials. I never threw them out. Each one still carries the weight of a place I belonged to briefly before someone decided I was optional. I opened the drawer, looked at the badge from Boston General. The photo had faded slightly. My eyes in the image looked tired, not defeated, just unused to being seen. I placed the badge behind the folder. I didn't make any phone calls, didn't call a lawyer, didn't post anything. I didn't even tell Michael, who would have told me to fight it, to make noise. Instead, I poured another cup of tea, not because it fixed anything, but because it didn't ask me to justify myself. That night, I didn't turn on any lights when I walked into the kitchen. The floorboards creaked in familiar ways. The air felt ordinary, but inside me something final had rearranged itself. Not in protest, in clarity, and I let it stay. I didn't pack the framed photo first. It sat on the corner of my desk, half lit by the desk lamp I never turned fully on. The silver edge had dulled over time, and the backing had come loose from years of moving. Still, it stayed upright, more out of habit than intention. Thanksgiving, 2008. That was the year we tried hosting at my apartment, because Mom said the house was under renovation. Lila had shown up 3 hours late with a bottle of wine she never opened. Dad had asked for football, and I'd streamed it from my laptop with spotty Wi-Fi. In the picture, we were all pretending. I left it plugged in for years after that. The soft backlight made it look warmer than I remembered. When I opened the draft email, my hands didn't hesitate. The sentence had been in my head since the meeting with legal. I didn't even have to think it through. I release all claims. I no longer wish to be affiliated. No flourish. No explanation. Not even a sign-off. I stared at it for a second. Then I clicked send. The fluorescent light above the door buzzed once. It always did that when the HVAC kicked in. I stood up and pulled the small carton from beneath the filing cabinet. Only one. I didn't need more than that. A paperweight shaped like a brain went in first, then the mug from the 2016 conference in San Diego, the coaster with the water stain that looked like Texas, the laminated ID badge from my fellowship year, cracked down the corner but still legible. I slid it in between a folder labeled Phase 2 Results and a mint tin that had never held mints. The photo was lost. I reached behind and pulled the cord free. The light faded in an instant, leaving just the image. No glow, no softness, just edges. My phone buzzed once. Evelyn. I heard from Dr. Lang that you stepped down from the board. I didn't answer immediately. Is this another one of your overreactions? There it was again, that steady erosion dressed in concern. You never really liked being in the spotlight. Maybe it's for the best. I closed the box. I'm fine, Mom. You worked hard for that position. I just hope this isn't about Lila again. She's always had better timing. I rested my hand on the top of the carton. The tape dispenser sat beside it, unused. I'm not looking for anything anymore. You always think everyone's keeping something from you. Maybe you should ask yourself why that keeps happening. She paused. Or maybe I did. You know, some people just let things go. The line disconnected. I folded the flap and sealed it shut. Not rushed. Just quiet. There had been a letter opener in my drawer for years, shaped like a scalpel. I used it once, then never again. I left it in the drawer. As I turned off the lights, I looked around once, not to remember, but to confirm. Everything I needed was already in the box. On the back of the door was a small sticker someone had put up months ago. You are here with a red dot and no map. I peeled it off and tossed it into the bin. Outside the elevator, the cleaning staff nodded. I nodded back. I didn't stop by the boardroom. I didn't tell anyone on the team. No announcements, no forwarding address. The auto-reply would say I was on extended leave. It wouldn't be inaccurate. At home, I set the box down in the entryway and left it there. I didn't open it. I didn't unpack. I boiled water. Chamomile. No sugar, no lemon. The mug from San Diego stayed wrapped. When I passed the hallway shelf, I noticed the framed photo of my residency cohort still faced forward. All smiles, all pressed coats. I turned it gently to the wall. Just for now. Lila texted later that night. Robert told me you dropped out. You didn't even fight. I didn't reply. Then another, fine. But don't come to the gala and act surprised. No punctuation, no name. I deleted both. The fridge hummed, one of its rhythms that had become background noise, until the rest of the noise left. I sat down at the kitchen table with the tea, and didn't pick up a book, didn't reach for music. There had always been this idea that silence came after conflict. I no longer believed that. Silence, I found, was not what followed a storm. It was what existed when no one showed up to make noise in the first place. I didn't unplug the fridge. I didn't turn off my phone. Just the frame. That was enough. I used to think quiet was something that happened to you. Now I understand it's something you can step into. I unlocked the front door without hesitation. The key still stuck a little, the way it had when my grandmother lived here. The brass knob felt cooler than I remembered, and the air inside carried a faint trace of dried lavender and dust. Not absence. Just time. There were no welcome mats, no missed calls, no photos on the wall. Just the faint outline where her rocking chair used to rest, worn circles on the wooden floor that hadn't been covered by any rug. I ran my hand along the edge of the entry table. The ceramic bowl was still there, chipped at one corner, pale blue, filled with rubber bands and buttons that hadn't been touched in years. I didn't unpack all at once. Just what I needed. A kettle, a mug, 3 sets of clothes. I opened the kitchen drawer and found a half-used bulk of chamomile tea books wrapped in faded paper. The date had long expired, but I kept them anyway. I placed one on the counter like a memory I didn't need to explain. No one asked where I was going. No one followed up after the email. There were no voicemails, no long messages with concern disguised as curiosity. It was as if my absence had been expected all along. A week passed before I heard my name out loud. I stopped by the farmer's market one morning. The woman at the flower stall looked up when I picked out the white tulips. "You've got the Whitlow hands," she said. Long fingers like rose. I didn't correct her. I handed her cash and walked away without taking change. The mirror in the hallway was still tilted slightly forward, the way Grandma Rose used to claim made everyone look humbler. I stood in front of it, with damp hair, a towel wrapped around my shoulders, and traced the outline of my reflection. I looked neither humbled nor grand, just unclaimed. The phone rang once. I let it go silent. Then again. I answered on the 3rd day. "Why didn't you say something?" Evelyn's voice clipped and breathy, like she'd climbed a flight of stairs. "We could have figured it out as a family." I did say something, I replied, "just not in ways you cared to hear. I talked to Lila. She didn't mean to leave your name off the list. It was a clerical thing. You always take things so personally." I stopped taking things. That's different. You think stepping away makes you righteous? She didn't wait for an answer. It makes you replaceable. I hung up while she was still speaking. There was an old envelope in the drawer beside the stove, addressed to Rose in blue ink, postmarked 1980s. The letter inside was folded 3 times. I didn't read it. I placed it back exactly as it was and closed the drawer without a sound. I started waking up without alarms. I swept the porch before the sun was fully up, watered the rosemary in the cracked clay pot near the back door, and made my bed with military corners, even if no one would see it. There was a relief in doing things for no audience. I wrote nothing. I submitted nothing. I deleted my name from 2 pending articles. When my colleague emailed, "We need your section for final review," I replied with a single sentence, "Please remove me from the author list." No explanation, no footnote. I was learning the grace of subtraction. One afternoon, I found the silver locket I thought I'd lost years ago. It had no photo inside, just a smooth surface as if it had been waiting for someone worth carrying. I left it empty. The neighbors waved. I waved back. No one asked what I did or why I was here. It felt like the first time I could exist without defending the shape of my presence. A week after the phone call, a box arrived. No return address. Inside a framed photo of the whole family, Thanksgiving 2008. Lila's handwriting on the back. Thought you might want a copy. I placed the frame on the mantel and turned it face down. No confrontation. No announcement. Just quiet. I boiled water in the white ceramic kettle. The handle had a hairline crack, like a vein beneath the glaze. I didn't fix it. The steam curled slowly into the kitchen. I poured the water over a new bag of tea, loose-leaf jasmine, bought with intention. The cup warmed my hands without demand. The notebook stayed shut on the table. I didn't need to write anything. The silence was already full. I no longer counted what was taken. I measured what I was willing to give, and the answer increasingly was less. This quiet didn't echo like absence. It held like a room that no longer needed applause. I never understood how a question could feel like a command until that voicemail. The first ring had barely finished when I let it go to audio. Graham's voice filtered through measured, polite practice. "Grace, hey. I thought maybe we could chat sometime soon. There's been some noise about the patent, and, well, Lila's just a little unsettled. We're sure it's all fine, but it might be good to clear the air." I didn't call back. I listened again. Once, then again slower. His tone never broke pattern. Not warmth, not distance, just maintenance, like I was one more account he had to reconcile. The envelope from my mother came the next day, the handwriting unmistakable. Blue ink slanted right her R's always a little too tall. No return address, just my name, and the house number I never gave her. Inside the letter, folded perfectly in thirds. No smudges, not even a signature, just Mom. "We're planning something nice for the anniversary. Simple, tasteful. If you come, wear something appropriate. It's important we present a united front. You're still part of the family. Not, we'd love to see you. Not, how have you been? Just a request for optics wrapped in the suggestion that my presence had always been assumed, though never invited." I put the letter on the counter next to a ceramic salt holder shaped like a pear. My grandmother used to keep loose change in it. Now it held thumbtacks, folded paperclips, a single safety pin. Ivy texted 3 hours later. "Lila's worried this might get messy. You know how influential you are. I'm sure you wouldn't want to ruin the family's reputation." She added a winking emoji. I printed it all, voicemail, transcript, letter, text thread. Not for evidence, for distance. There's something sobering about watching people's words exist outside the screen. No tone to guess, just ink and implications. Once years ago, I'd asked my mother what she wanted for Christmas. She told me, "Don't get me anything extravagant, Grace. Just don't embarrass me this year." She smiled after like it was a joke. I remember holding the ribbon I was about to tie around her gift. I let it go slack. That year I wore navy to the dinner. Lila wore gold. Everyone said she sparkled. This time no one asked what I'd wear. They only reminded me to wear it right. I opened the file folder and slid the letter from Evelyn behind the others. The paper was heavier than the rest, thick, like invitations to things I was no longer invited to. For a moment, I pressed my thumb into the edge until it bent. At the grocery store, the woman behind the counter asked if I wanted stamps. I nodded without thinking. She handed me a sheet with faded wildflowers. I didn't use them. I placed one of the envelopes in the drawer beside the fridge, unsealed, unwritten. It wasn't meant to travel. When I was 10, I wrote a letter to the tooth fairy, explaining that I'd lost the tooth somewhere on the bus and couldn't offer proof. I left it under my pillow with a single bobby pin. In the morning, the bobby pin was gone. A $5 bill had taken its place. I asked my mother if she had any idea how the tooth fairy knew. She looked at me and said, "Don't ask questions if you're not ready for answers." Even then I understood what she meant wasn't about teeth. Lila once told me at her bridal shower, "You always think you're owed something because you try so hard, but not everyone needs to be the center." I had brought her a pale blue scarf from an old trip to Copenhagen. I watched her pass it down the line without unwrapping it. No one said thank you. That night, I left early. No one noticed. Now I watched the kitchen light flicker above the stove. The bulb had always done that, even when my grandmother lived here. She used to call it her quiet warning that things were about to change. I didn't change the bulb. I stood at the sink, unfolded the letter again, and read the words as if they belonged to someone else. If I tilted the paper just right, I could see the indentation where she had pressed too hard on the pen. It was the only part of the message that felt honest. I folded it back and placed it in the envelope without sealing it. I didn't plan to reply. That wasn't the point. I drank tea from the cup I always used when I needed to feel real. A thin chip on the rim that caught on my lip if I wasn't careful. I never replaced it. No one mentioned the work I had done. No one apologized. No one asked what it had cost to remain silent for so long. They returned only when silence threatened their convenience. I didn't close the envelope. I didn't send anything back. And still I was the one being asked to behave like I belonged. Some silences aren't empty. They just stopped needing applause. The first time I put on the white blouse again, it felt unfamiliar, not like a memory, but like something I had borrowed from someone I no longer resembled. The collar still held a faint crease from where I used to pin my badge, though the badge was long gone. I folded the blouse slowly, pressed it into a cedar-lined box, and sealed it with a strip of masking tape. On the label I wrote, "No longer mine." The clock in the hallway hadn't ticked in weeks. I had removed the battery and left the hands where they'd landed 7:43. A morning without meetings, a calendar left untouched, a name withdrawn from a list. I never told anyone what the time meant. I didn't need to. At the local research center, I was asked if I'd be interested in guest lecturing for a small course on applied neurobiology. The request came not through connection or favor, but from a former student who remembered a footnote in one of my old lectures. "You made it feel like it mattered," she wrote. That was enough. The room where I taught had no projector, just a chalkboard and 3 narrow windows. The heater clicked like an old typewriter. I liked the way students leaned forward when I paused, not because they expected a reveal, but because they were actually listening. Maya stayed after one day, lingered near the bookshelf with a notebook tucked under her arm. She had circled a journal name at the top of the page. "You used to publish here, didn't you?" She held it out like a question folded in reverence. "You don't anymore." I traced the edge of the paper with one finger. "I write where readers pause between lines," I said, "not where headlines swallow the substance." She nodded and tucked the notebook away as if my answer belonged exactly there. In the mornings, I walked past the garden bed that used to be overrun with weeds and slowly replaced them with wild daisies. Their petals opened unevenly. Some refused to face the sun. I liked that about them. Ivy messaged one evening, "We're having dinner next Saturday, like we used to. You should come. Mom says she'll make that soup you used to love." I stared at the message longer than I needed to. I typed one line. "Thanks. I'm baking that night. Just me." Then I put the phone away. There was no follow-up. The recipe card I used was handwritten in pencil edges curled from use. I didn't follow it exactly. I never had. The smell of cinnamon reminded me of the apartment I once rented above a bookstore. It was the only place I ever paid for in full with my own grant money. I'd forgotten the name of the street, but I remembered the chipped windowsill and the hum of the heater through winter. When I taught, I wore navy sweaters and kept chalk dust on my fingertips. No one called me doctor. No one corrected my name. It was printed clearly on the course syllabus Grace Whitlow. Not Dr. Grace. Not Lila's sister. Just mine! I started keeping dried flowers in a jar on the kitchen table. Not arranged, not manicured, just gathered. The scent faded by evening, but the stems stayed upright. Sometimes that was enough. The blouse in the cedar box stayed untouched. The clock in the hallway stayed still. The envelope from Evelyn still sat unsealed in the drawer beneath a stack of old grocery lists, and a spare key that no longer matched any lock I owned. When the wind moved through the window screen, it rustled the edge of the curtain like fingers turning a page. I never weighed it down. A neighbor left a jar of plum jam by my door with a note that read, "For when bread isn't quite enough." I kept it on the windowsill unopened, not out of politeness, not out of disinterest, just because it felt like enough simply to be offered something with no expectation. I no longer explained my absence from the world I used to orbit. I no longer corrected the assumptions others chose to keep. I answered only when I wanted to, and not to set the record straight, but to protect the silence I had earned. There were no breakthroughs, no declarations, no dramatic refusals, only a soft refusal to return. Only small acts repeated, folding the same towel, opening the same window, declining the same invitations. When I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, I no longer waited for resemblance. I didn't check for approval in the lines of my face. I didn't measure the weight of belonging. I noticed the hair I hadn't brushed the sleeve slightly damp from the sink. And then I moved on. I poured a cup of tea from the old enamel kettle, the one with the burn mark near the handle. The scent rose quietly. I placed the jar of dried flowers beside it. I didn't need to mark the moment. It was enough to let it be. I never liked the sound of stamped paper. That heavy, decisive thud it made when someone else chose the end of something. This time I brought the envelope myself. Karen Doyle's office hadn't changed. Still the same pale walls, still the same rectangular window that never quite opened all the way. The chairs made no sound when I sat down. I hadn't called ahead. She didn't need a warning. I placed the folder on her desk, unmarked, but worn at the corners. Inside 3 statements, 2 letters and a page with only 1 sentence. She didn't open them yet. "I'm not filing a claim," I said. She nodded once. Her fingers hovered over the clasp. No press, no announcements, no court. What would you like instead? Removal. From all property titles tied to Lila, all shared patents, all future royalties. Karen paused. This means full disassociation. No back pay, no formal acknowledgement. You won't appear on anything. I know. That's the point. She opened the folder and read. I waited through the quiet clicks of her eyes scanning text she didn't need to interpret. My signature was already there in black ink on the final page. "I'll process it today. You'll receive a final copy by mail." There was one more envelope in my coat pocket. Thicker paper, handwritten. No address, no return, name. I slid it forward. She didn't ask. Inside a single note addressed to my parents. "I won't be attending. Thank you for the invitation." It was folded once not sealed. I had written it 2 weeks earlier, but hadn't sent it. I still wouldn't, but I wanted it recorded somewhere. The card they'd sent me was glossy, floral. "Join us in celebrating 40 years of love." I had traced my finger over the cursive once, not to admire it, but to make sure I hadn't misread. Beneath it, "Please dress appropriately. You are still part of this family. Still. As if belonging was a default I'd somehow strayed from. As if presence could be declared by those who had withheld it for years. I left Karen's office without handshakes or goodbyes. She understood. That was why I chose her. The wind outside had softened. It brushed past instead of pushing against me. I didn't take the main road home. I took the long way, past the old florist, past the park with the rusted swings, past the bakery that still made ginger scones on Thursdays. I stopped across the street from my parents' house. From here, the porch looked almost cinematic. Lanterns strung along the edges, a welcome mat freshly vacuumed. Through the curtains I could make out silhouettes. Someone adjusted their tie. Someone else raised a glass. Lila's laugh carried through the glass like static. I didn't move closer. My hands stayed in my coat pockets. I hadn't worn the dress they would have approved of. I wasn't holding anything that needed delivering. I stood long enough for the wind to change direction. The banner said cheers to 40 years, but the S in cheers had come loose, dangling by a single pin. It moved gently, as if nodding to itself. I walked away before it could fall. At home, the envelope from the Institute was waiting on the table. The seal was broken, not by me. I had left it open on purpose, untouched for days. I had needed to do the other thing first. Inside, confirmation. Formal offer to serve as lead instructor for the spring semester. Neurological applications in clinical design. No co-signatories, no shared authorship. Just my name. I read it slowly this time, tracing each word like one traces a scar they've finally accepted. I didn't feel pride. I didn't need it. I just needed it to be true. On the shelf above the stove was a jar of chamomile from Rose's garden. I hadn't used it yet. I brewed a cup that night. The steam curled upward and didn't ask for attention. I held the mug in both hands and let it settle. The blouse I used to wear at the hospital, stiff-collared, monogrammed, always one size too large, was folded in a cedar box now. I had written "no longer mine" on a small card and slipped it between the fabric layers. Not for drama, just for clarity. On the wall, the clock my mother gave me once, still frozen at 7:43 a.m., hadn't moved. I had taken out the battery months ago. That was the hour I stepped out of the research building for the last time. I thought about putting the envelope from my parents into the trash, but I didn't. I slid it into the same drawer where I kept old tea bags and used postage. The places things go when they no longer need to be responded to. I didn't write back. I didn't call. The silence wasn't spite. It was shape. It was mine. I no longer rush to silence the quiet. The calendar on the wall still reads last Thursday. I haven't moved it forward. I let the paper curl at the corners and hang unevenly like it belongs to a version of time that no longer includes me. The kettle hums the same song each morning. I no longer rush it. Sometimes I let the water cool before pouring it, and I drink it anyway. I wear the same cardigan 3 days in a row. The sleeves are stretched. There's a faint thread unraveling near the cuff. I haven't mended it. It holds a kind of permission, soft and undemanding. There's a letter from my mother still resting on the edge of the table. I never sent a reply. I never tore it up either. It remains sealed not out of hope, but out of acceptance. Its presence doesn't ask anything of me. I've let it become part of the room, like the shadows that shift but never speak. The ceramic cup I use every day has a line across its base, a crack so fine you can only feel it with your fingertip. On the side, faint words are etched beneath the glaze. The quiet is yours. Keep it. I don't know where I got it. I just know I keep returning to it like it's the only voice that doesn't want anything from me. I don't check my phone in the mornings. Most days it stays face down until afternoon. Notifications gather dust, and I no longer feel the urge to clear them. I prune the lavender without gloves now. The stems leave faint scratches on my fingers, and I welcome them. They remind me that small wounds don't always need tending. This house, once my grandmother's, holds nothing grand. The windows creak. The floor breathes beneath my feet. The drawers stick. But everything has earned its stillness. Even the silence between objects feels chosen. At the market last week, the woman selling homemade preserves asked if I was new in town. I just nodded. She handed me a jar without a label and said, "This one's for people who don't need to explain themselves." I didn't ask what was inside. I still haven't opened it. A student from the institute emailed yesterday, asking if I'd be open to mentoring. I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed only maybe. What do you need that no one else will listen to? I haven't hit send. I may never. The act of answering no longer begins with response. It begins with whether I want to take part. My hands move more slowly now, not from age or weight, but because I no longer feel the need to finish things quickly. A loaf of bread can take a full afternoon. A sentence can take an hour. A decision can wait until the air settles. Lila called again. I let it ring until the sound folded into silence. She didn't leave a message, she rarely does. She wants reaction, not response. I no longer offer either. At one point in my life, I thought healing looked like return. That to be whole meant to be welcomed back, to be re-invited, re-acknowledged. But I've come to understand that healing often looks like not going back at all. There's an old lab coat in the closet I haven't touched in months. The inside tag still has my name half faded. I wrapped it in brown paper last night and wrote in pencil, "Retired, not erased." I placed it under the bed next to a box of saved tea tins and letters I no longer need to reread. The clock on the wall, the one my mother gave me when I was promoted at the hospital, still ticks, but I removed the battery last month. It now rests at 7:43 a.m., the hour I walked out of the boardroom for the last time. I like it better that way. A moment chosen then, left alone. When people say I've disappeared, what they mean is that I stopped answering to the version of me they preferred. I didn't vanish. I simply stopped being available to roles that never fit. Last week, I declined an invitation to a symposium. The speaker list included names that once meant everything to me. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I folded the envelope neatly, returned it to its sleeve, and placed it beside the unopened one from my mother. I don't archive out of nostalgia anymore. I archive to remember the weight of choice. A neighbor left a note in my mailbox yesterday. "We're having a potluck next Friday. Would be nice to see you." No signature. Just a time and address. I placed it under the fridge magnet, shaped like a bird. I may go, I may not. I don't owe anyone a reason. I light a candle in the evening, not for scent or beauty, but because it's the kind of ritual that doesn't ask for applause. Some days it burns to the bottom. Others I blow it out before it finishes. Either way, it's mine. I've stopped telling people what I do. If they ask, I just say I teach. If they press, I say enough. I don't explain the past. I don't carry my resume in my voice. The most surprising part of all this is how full everything feels even when I'm alone. Not crowded, just enough. Just mine. I walked past the mirror today without straightening my posture. The reflection didn't need correcting. At noon, I brewed another cup of tea. The steam rose without ceremony. I used the chipped cup again. I didn't stir the honey. I let it sink. There's no conclusion to this, no headline, no final act, just presence, just breath. Just one more morning where I didn't need a calendar to validate the hour. I drank it cool. I did nothing more. But it was enough.